You know, there's something peculiar about certain people. They walk into a room and feel everything. The unspoken tension between two friends, the sadness behind a practiced smile, the weight of words that were never said. We call it a gift, this ability to see what others miss. But what if it isn't a gift at all? What if it's the most dangerous thing you'll ever possess? Not a danger to your body, but to your belonging, to the fragile peace that keeps most people asleep. Because once you begin to see clearly, you can never again return to the beautiful unconsciousness that holds the world together. You start to notice how everyone is playing a part, the laughter that feels rehearsed, the small talk that keeps souls at a safe distance, the smiles that hide storms. And then there's you, the one who can't unsee it. You become the quiet witness to the illusions everyone else agrees to keep alive. You're not trying to be different, you just can't pretend anymore. That's where it begins, the silent danger of awareness. A danger not of madness, but of clarity, of seeing through the play and realizing that you no longer know your role in it. What happens when your eyes stay open in a world that prefers to keep them closed?
Most people live at the surface of things. They move through life like stones skipping across water, touching moments, but never sinking into them. And yet, there are a few who fall straight through the surface. They don't just enter a room, they receive it. Every sigh, every shift in tone, every hidden flicker of discomfort moves through them like an invisible current. They see not only what is happening, but what is trying to be hidden. The forced smile concealing exhaustion, the lover's laughter that trembles with resentment, the friend who says, "I'm fine," and means, "I'm falling apart, but I don't know how to say it." It's as if their perception has no skin, no barrier between themselves and the invisible vibrations of others. They absorb what most people deflect, the sorrow in a cheerful song, the despair behind success, the small, silent implosions of everyday lives. And at first, it feels almost divine, to see the world in its unfiltered truth, to see beneath the masks, to feel the undercurrents that others miss. But clarity is not gentle. It doesn't whisper. It pierces. It strips away the veils that make the human play bearable. You begin to realize that society itself is a grand choreography of forgetting, a mutual agreement to stay asleep. We call it normality, smiling when we're breaking, performing joy for the sake of belonging, pretending that politeness is the same as peace. It's an elaborate theater, and everyone knows the script by heart. You ask, "How are you?" They say, "Fine." You both pretend that this exchange means something real. The stage lights stay bright, and the actors never break character. But once you see the strings that hold the play together, you can't sit back and enjoy it anymore. You notice how laughter is sometimes just noise meant to cover silence, how kindness is often a performance of virtue, how people don't meet, they collide, each one hiding behind the fragile architecture of their role, and suddenly, you realize how alone perception can make you. Because the moment you see, you step outside of the collective trance. You stop being part of the dream and start becoming its witness. There's a strange ache in this kind of seeing, a loneliness that has nothing to do with absence and everything to do with distance. It's like living behind a pane of glass, watching life unfold but unable to re-enter the illusion. You long for the simplicity of not knowing, for the comfort of small talk that doesn't mean anything, for the peace that comes with believing the stories people tell themselves. But once the eye awakens, it doesn't close again. You can pretend, but you'll feel the weight of your own pretending. This is the unseen layer of reality, a realm beneath words and gestures, where everything true hums quietly, waiting to be felt. And the tragedy is that the more you feel it, the less you can explain it. How do you tell someone, "I feel the sadness in your voice," when they haven't yet heard it themselves? How do you describe to others the vibration of falseness in a room that they insist feels perfectly fine? You can't. So you stay quiet, you smile softly, you let the play continue. But something within you shifts, a sacred fracture between who you once were and who you've now become. To see what others don't is to begin a journey few can accompany you on. It's the slow awakening from a dream no one knows they're dreaming. And though it hurts, there's beauty in it too. Because to see truth, even when it costs you comfort, is to begin living in the raw light of reality itself. The first thing you lose when you begin to see clearly is your belonging, not your place in the world, but your place within it. You start to feel as though life has quietly shifted 1 inch to the left, and you are no longer standing where everyone else is. Conversations still happen, laughter still erupts, people still tell their stories. Yet something in you has stepped outside the rhythm. You're watching the dance you once took part in, realizing that what you thought was music was often just noise, that what looked like connection was sometimes only choreography. It's a strange kind of exile, one without borders or guards, but in which the walls are invisible and everywhere. When you perceive too deeply, your very presence begins to change the air around you. Others can feel it, even if they can't name it. They sense that you see them, not the version they offer, but the trembling reality behind it. And for many that is unbearable. People cling to their characters like lifeboats. They depend on their illusions to stay afloat. When you stand before them without judgment but with vision, they feel the mask sliding, and so instinctively they pull away. Soon your insight becomes mistaken for accusation. Your honesty feels like intrusion. You start hearing the same phrases repeated. You think too much. You're too sensitive. You read too deeply into everything. It sounds harmless, but underneath it is a plea. Please stop seeing me. And that's the moment when awareness becomes isolation. When the world asks you to dim your light so that others can remain comfortable in their shadows. There is a peculiar pain in pretending not to know what you know. You try to laugh with them, to stay on the surface, to nod at the script you once believed in. But it doesn't quite fit anymore. You find yourself speaking a language no one else understands. A dialect of silence, intuition, and hidden meaning. And the more fluent you become in it, the lonelier it makes you. At night, when the noise of the day dissolves, the quiet becomes vast. You start to wonder if perhaps you've gone too far, if maybe the problem isn't that others can't see, but that you see too much. The mind searches for a reason to return, to forget, to re-enter the dream. But there's no door back to unconsciousness. Once the eye opens, the curtain never falls again. You begin to notice how people look away when truth glints through your words, how they quickly change the subject, how their laughter becomes sharper, like a defense mechanism of the soul. And gradually, you learn to stay silent, not out of fear, but out of tenderness. You realize that truth is heavy, and not everyone has yet grown strong enough to carry it. Silence becomes your mercy. But even mercy has a cost. Every time you swallow what you see, a small part of you disappears behind your own restraint. This is the paradox of the awakened mind. To see with clarity, yet to live among those who prefer fog. You become both participant and observer, both inside and outside. You speak, but only half of what you mean. You listen, but to layers no one else hears. It is not superiority, it is simply a different altitude. And at that height, the air thins. Conversations that once nourished you now taste of cardboard. Social warmth begins to feel like artificial light, bright but without heat. And yet, within this solitude, something luminous begins to grow. In the silence left behind by lost belonging, there is a deeper presence waiting, your own. The isolation is not punishment, it is initiation. It strips away the noise of collective pretending until you stand naked before the truth of your own consciousness. You start to understand that what feels like exile is, in fact, a summons. A call to live without masks, to learn the art of being whole without the comfort of agreement. Awareness does not truly isolate you, it merely reveals the distance between truth and illusion. And that distance, while painful, is sacred ground, the space where real understanding begins to bloom. Because when you stop needing the world to see what you see, you start to belong again. Not to the crowd, but to existence itself. The isolation of awareness is the crucible where the seer is tempered. It is the silence that teaches discernment, how to love without rescuing, how to witness without interfering, how to stand among the sleeping without despising their dreams. And in that stillness, the pain begins to soften into peace. Because solitude, once feared as emptiness, becomes the quiet companionship of truth itself. There is a quiet breaking that happens inside a person who sees too much. It's not a loud or visible collapse. It's subtle, almost sacred. You start to realize that your outer life and your inner truth no longer speak the same language. The smile you wear doesn't fit your mouth anymore, The conversations you have feel like echoes of a self you no longer are, and while everyone around you seems perfectly at home in the script, you begin to sense that you're only acting in a play whose ending you already know. The fracture begins innocently. A small hesitation before you agree, a tiny discomfort when you laugh, a soft voice that whispers, "This isn't you anymore." At first you ignore it. You keep playing along because you don't want to seem distant or strange. But the longer you deny that inner voice, the louder it becomes. Until one day you realize you're living two lives, the visible one that keeps you accepted, and the invisible one that keeps you honest. Between them, a thin line of tension hums constantly, like the faint ringing of a hidden bell. You start to feel it everywhere. When you say yes but mean no, when you stay silent though something inside you is screaming, when you smile just to make others comfortable, even as your soul quietly withdraws. This is the split within, the tearing apart of what is seen from what is felt, what is spoken from what is known. It's not insanity, it's awareness, trapped inside the machinery of normal life. You are awake in a world that rewards sleep, and so your very clarity becomes a burden you must carry carefully. Every truth left unspoken becomes a ghost that lingers in your chest. You feel it pacing there, that unexpressed knowing, that restrained honesty, like a caged light desperate to breathe. You try to hide it behind small talk, behind politeness, behind the language of belonging, but the truth doesn't dissolve. It waits. It waits for the quiet moment between words when your guard slips and it can rise again, whispering reminders that you are not what you pretend to be, and that whisper, over time, becomes unbearable. You begin to sense that you are betraying yourself in order to remain loved, that every time you choose comfort over truth, you drift a little further from your own center. And yet, to speak what you see feels dangerous. You know too well how easily others mistake honesty for hostility. You've felt the air change when you tell a truth that isn't convenient. You've watched faces harden, watched warmth evaporate, watched connection turn to distance, so you learn to ration your truth, to let it live quietly inside you, untold. But even silence has a cost. That cost is inner dissonance, the weight of living as two selves that cannot quite touch, the part of you that perceives the world with painful clarity and the part that must move through it pretending not to. They coexist, but not peacefully. The inner one watches the outer one like an old soul observing a child, and the outer one, smiling, polite, exhausted, wonders if the inner one has ruined everything. You feel both ancient and displaced, tired and tender. You begin to miss the innocence of unknowing, even though you could never return to it. Yet beneath this ache lies a deeper intelligence, because this split, though painful, is not your enemy. It is the threshold where truth meets transformation. You begin to see that what's breaking inside you isn't meant to destroy you, but to separate the real from the false. The fracture is refining you, forcing you to choose alignment over acceptance, authenticity over applause. It hurts because you are shedding the layers of yourself that were never truly yours. And slowly, through that ache, something new begins to form. A self that no longer performs, but simply is. You start to speak less, but mean more. You stop trying to explain your perception and start embodying it instead. You realize that wholeness isn't about fixing the split, it's about allowing both sides of you to coexist without shame. The seer and the participant, the silent and the spoken, the awake and the weary. They all belong to the same being. When you stop fighting your duality, peace begins to return, not the peace of ignorance, but the peace of integration. The mind quiets when it no longer has to choose between truth and belonging. The heart softens when it realizes it can love others without abandoning what it knows, and in that moment, the fracture inside you begins to glow, not as a wound, but as a window. Through it, light passes freely between what is seen and what is hidden. This is the true gift, buried inside the split within, the birth of inner coherence, the understanding that you were never meant to fit entirely into a world built on pretense. You were meant to become a bridge between illusion and truth, between appearance and essence, between the human play and the silent watcher behind it. And though this path is lonely, it is also holy, for it teaches you the most important thing of all, that seeing clearly is not a curse to escape, but a calling to embody. That every fracture in your being was only ever light, trying to find its way out. There is a certain heaviness that follows those who feel too deeply. a weight that doesn't come from their own life, but from everything they absorb that isn't theirs. It begins subtly, a sudden sadness after a conversation, a strange tension when someone smiles, an anxiety that enters the room before a word is spoken. You start to realize that you are carrying something invisible, something collective. The quiet grief of the people around you. Their emotions enter you like echoes, and before long, you can no longer tell where they end and where you begin. At first it feels like empathy, that beautiful ability to sense and understand. But empathy without boundaries becomes erosion. You find yourself dissolving into the moods of others, shifting shape to match the unspoken. You walk into a room feeling whole and leave feeling fragmented, uncertain of what you touched or what touched you. Your own emotions become diluted, borrowed, contaminated by the psychic noise of the world. You start confusing compassion with absorption, connection with contagion, and this is how awareness becomes exhaustion, not because of what you see but because of what you carry. It is a strange form of disappearance. The more you feel, the less of you seems to remain. You become a mirror reflecting everyone else's sorrow, a sponge for invisible storms. You hear someone's laughter and feel the ache beneath it. You sense a person's anger, and suddenly your pulse begins to race as if it were your own. You sit beside someone in silence and leave trembling, heavy with emotions you never lived. This is the cost of porous perception, the quiet theft of your own inner space. In this state, peace becomes slippery. You try to rest, but even rest vibrates with other people's pain. You meditate only to find the echo of a friend's grief sitting quietly behind your breath. You wake in the morning, already tired, because your mind has been carrying the weight of the collective all night. You begin to question your own reality. Is this sadness mine? Is this fear me? Or something I've borrowed? The boundaries blur until you are no longer sure where your soul ends and the world begins. But awareness, even when overwhelming, is still a form of wisdom trying to find its balance. What you are learning, painfully, intimately, is that feeling deeply is not the same as being responsible for what you feel. You are not meant to heal every wound that calls to you. You are not required to rescue every brokenness that brushes against your heart. Compassion does not mean consumption. True empathy does not demand self-erasure. The challenge then is to learn the sacred art of separation, not the cold withdrawal of indifference, but the gentle knowing of what belongs to you and what does not. It's like learning to walk through a storm without mistaking the wind for your own breath, to feel the suffering of others without drowning in it, to witness the ache of the world without making it your personal cross to bear. Because if you let everything enter, everything begins to own you. You begin to understand that clarity must be paired with containment. Just as the ocean holds both its waves and its depths, you must hold your perception without letting it flood your being. This means building boundaries not from walls, but from awareness, an inner strength that allows you to stand in the fire of feeling without being consumed. You stop apologizing for needing solitude, for retreating, for recharging. You begin to see that solitude is not escape, it's recovery. It's how the empath repairs the cracks through which the world seeps in. And slowly, something miraculous happens. You start hearing your own voice again, faint at first, like a distant melody beneath the noise. The emotions that once swirled together begin to separate, like colors settling in water. You realize that not everything you feel is a message meant for you. Some feelings are simply passing visitors, seeking acknowledgement before they move on. You learn to greet them with grace, then let them go, to witness without absorbing, to care without collapsing. Through this practice, you discover the difference between connection and entanglement. Connection nourishes. It allows two beings to meet and still remain whole. Entanglement drains, it blurs, fuses, consumes. And so you begin to choose connection consciously, learning that love does not require you to lose yourself, that the highest compassion is not self-sacrifice, but self-presence. For only when you remain anchored in your own center can you truly be a safe harbor for others. The weight of others' emotions doesn't disappear, it never does, but it transforms. It becomes something you can hold lightly, like a cloud that passes through you rather than a storm that owns you. You stop confusing awareness with obligation. You stop mistaking exhaustion for empathy. You begin to live as a clear vessel, open enough to feel, but strong enough to stay empty when you must. And perhaps that is the final lesson of deep perception, to understand that your sensitivity was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to teach you the rhythm of balance, how to love without absorbing, how to feel without falling, how to walk through a world full of pain and beauty without mistaking either for yourself. Because when you learn this, you no longer carry the emotions of others like burdens. You carry them like music, notes that pass through you, resonating, but never defining who you are. There comes a moment in every deeply perceptive life when exhaustion gives way to clarity, a moment where you realize that seeing does not require saving. For so long you have mistaken awareness for responsibility. You believed that to see suffering meant to heal it, that to perceive someone's pain meant it was somehow yours to mend. But here, at the quiet crossroads of your awakening, you begin to understand something profoundly different, that not everything you perceive is meant to be changed. Some things are meant only to be seen, and seeing itself, when done with love, is its own form of grace. You start to notice how your attempts to fix often made the water murkier, not clearer. Like stirring a muddy river in desperation to make it clean, your well-intentioned efforts only deepened the chaos. But now, something inside you softens. You begin to see that truth doesn't need your interference, it only needs your presence. Life reveals itself in its own timing, and no one awakens before they are ready. The river clears itself when the current slows. Your task is not to control it, but to trust its flow. There is a deep humility in this realization. For the first time, you see how even your desire to help was a form of attachment, a subtle attempt to shape the world according to your understanding of peace. You wanted to rescue others from their illusions, not realizing that illusion is the necessary cocoon of their becoming. Just as you once needed darkness to recognize light, they too must wander their own labyrinth before they can see. And so you learn to step back, not from indifference, but from reverence. You stop trying to be the savior and begin to honor the sacred autonomy of every soul's journey. This shift feels strange at first. There's a quiet ache in no longer rushing to fix, a tremor of guilt in allowing others to struggle. You've built your identity on caring, on perceiving, on protecting. But true compassion asks something higher, not the impulse to intervene, but the strength to trust, to love someone without trying to rearrange their fate, to stand beside pain without turning it into a project, to see clearly and yet let things be. And it is here, in this restraint, that your awareness matures into wisdom. You realize that clarity does not demand control. You can witness a storm without trying to command the clouds. You can hold space for someone's sorrow without trying to drain it from them. This is not withdrawal, it's respect for the hidden intelligence of life. You begin to understand that every struggle has its own timing, every soul its own tempo of transformation, and so you become a quiet participant in the unfolding rather than its director. The paradox is that once you stop trying to change everything you see, your seeing becomes even clearer. When the mind no longer grasps, the vision expands. You stop projecting your urgency onto the world, and the world reveals its quiet order to you. You begin to perceive that even chaos has symmetry, that even suffering contains its own strange perfection. What once felt unbearable now appears as part of a vast choreography, one that does not require your correction, only your witnessing. And as you let go, something miraculous begins to happen. People no longer feel threatened by your clarity, because you no longer demand that they see what you see. Your perception becomes spacious, forgiving. You see others as they are, without needing them to be different. You start to embody a calm that others can feel, not because you fixed them, but because you stopped trying to. Your presence itself becomes medicine. You radiate stillness instead of instruction, compassion instead of control. This is the essence of true seeing, awareness that neither grasps nor judges. It is the gentle eye that understands without insisting, the open heart that allows others to evolve at their own pace. When you live this way, you discover that your vision is not a weapon, but a light. It no longer burns, it illuminates. You can walk among the half-awake and love them for their dreams, knowing that awakening cannot be forced, only invited. You can witness the world's confusion and not drown in it, because you've made peace with the mystery of its unfolding. To see without saving is to finally align with the rhythm of life itself, to know that everything is always finding its way toward balance, even when it appears broken. You realize that the universe is not asking for your correction. It is asking for your participation, your quiet, conscious participation in its flow. And in this realization, your awareness ceases to be a burden. It becomes devotion, a living prayer, an act of surrender to what is. This is the turning point, the shift from effort to ease, from control to compassion, from burdened seeing to liberated witnessing. You begin to understand that the world doesn't need you to save it. It only needs you to stay awake within it. For the greatest transformation happens not when you try to change others, but when your own stillness becomes a mirror in which they begin to see themselves. And so the one who once felt crushed by perception now walks lightly through it. The river flows, the world dreams, and you, the seer, stand quietly at its edge, not demanding that the water clear, only watching as it does. That is the art of seeing without saving, the moment when clarity becomes peace and awareness finally learns how to love without condition. There is a subtle wisdom that arrives after you've tried everything, after you've felt too much, carried too much, and finally learned to let the world breathe without your constant intervention. It's the wisdom of distance. Not the cold kind that walls itself off from life, but the conscious kind, the distance that allows you to love the world without being consumed by it. This is where perception becomes peace, where awareness stops bleeding and begins to bless. You begin to realize that to see clearly, you must stand a few steps back from what you see. When you're too close to the fire, all you feel is the burn, but when you step back, you can finally see the shape of the flame. Its movement, its beauty, its impermanence. This is what conscious distance offers. Perspective without numbness, compassion without collapse. It is not withdrawal, it's a sacred equilibrium, the art of being fully present yet profoundly free. For so long you believed that to care meant to merge, to prove your sincerity by dissolving your boundaries. But now you understand that true compassion requires form. A container strong enough to hold both yourself and the other without confusion. You can love deeply without being swallowed. You can walk beside someone suffering without falling into it. You can be near the storm and still remain the sky. This is the quiet discipline of the awakened heart. To feel everything, yet not lose yourself in anything. Conscious distance is not about building walls. It's about knowing where you end and the world begins. It's recognizing that your clarity needs space to breathe. When you let everyone's energy seep into your inner world unchecked, you begin to disappear beneath it. But when you create gentle boundaries, not out of fear, but out of self-respect, your perception becomes sharper, your empathy more genuine. You no longer react to everything that moves. You observe, respond, and choose. You begin to live from center instead of survival. And that center, you discover, is not fragile. It's vast, like a still lake reflecting the chaos of the sky without losing its calm. The world can scream, yet inside you, silence hums. You can hear the noise of others' emotions, but you no longer mistake it for your own heartbeat. You can witness the illusions without despising them, because you now know illusion is part of the learning process of every soul. You've stopped taking the world personally. You've stopped fighting to be understood. You've learned to rest inside the unseen. It is here that presence takes on a new quality. It becomes effortless. You no longer force connection, you allow it. You no longer chase meaning, you embody it. You no longer grip experience, you flow with it. People start to feel safe around you, not because you promise comfort, but because you carry serenity. They sense that your awareness does not demand or judge, it simply is. You become the still point in a spinning world, and without trying you begin to heal what words never could. If we're not trying to heal what words never could, to live with conscious distance is to finally understand the paradox of existence, that we are both woven into everything and yet entirely our own. You start to love differently, not as possession, but as presence. You listen differently, not waiting to reply, but to truly hear. You see differently, not to analyze, but to honor. Life stops being a storm you must survive and becomes an ocean you can float upon. You stop defending yourself against reality and start dancing with it. And the beauty of this dance is that it no longer drains you, because distance has taught you rhythm, when to step forward, when to step back, when to let silence do the speaking. You learn to let moments breathe, to let people unfold, to let truth reveal itself without your insistence. You understand that energy, like water, finds its level naturally. You don't need to push or pull. You only need to remain open and steady like a mountain that doesn't chase clouds, yet holds the rain with grace. This is what it means to live consciously, to exist in intimacy with everything, yet enslaved by nothing, to be fully involved in life, yet untouched by its chaos. You begin to carry a serenity that no longer depends on outcomes, a peace that doesn't require agreement, a love that doesn't need return. You see now that distance is not the absence of connection, but the foundation that allows connection to endure. And perhaps the most astonishing part is that your sensitivity, once a wound, becomes your wisdom. The very depth that once drowned you now becomes the depth that steadies others. You are no longer a sponge for the world's emotions, but a vessel through which life moves cleanly, freely, without residue. You have learned to love from a place of clarity, to give without depletion, to see without suffering. That is the art of conscious distance, the rare balance between feeling and freedom. It is the way of those who have been broken by awareness and rebuilt by understanding, the way of those who have looked too deeply into the world and have finally learned how to stay whole within it, to stand close enough to touch truth, yet far enough to remain its witness, to love everything, yet to need nothing from it. That is where clarity becomes compassion, and perception becomes peace. There comes a day when the ache begins to quiet, not because the world has changed, but because you have. You no longer tremble beneath the weight of seeing, you stand within it, steady, clear, awake. The same perceptions that once felt like storms now arrive as gentle rain. The same truths that once fractured you now flow through you with ease. What once overwhelmed you now feels sacred. You begin to understand that integration isn't the end of awakening, it is its flowering. All along, you were never meant to escape your depth, only to learn how to live peacefully within it. Integration begins when the seer and the human finally sit together in the same heart, when awareness and tenderness stop fighting and start listening to each other. You realize you can be both, the one who perceives deeply and the one who laughs, forgets, feels, stumbles, and loves anyway. You can hold wisdom without abandoning wonder. You can carry clarity without losing warmth. The mind softens here. It stops trying to interpret everything and begins to simply witness. You notice that the world no longer threatens your peace because you no longer resist its imperfections. You see the same illusions, the same human masks, the same endless dramas, but now you understand their necessity. They are not barriers to truth. They are part of truth's unfolding. Even the noise, even the blindness, even the pretense, all of it belongs, all of it serves something larger. Integration is the moment when awareness learns humility, when you realize that not every insight must become action, not every illusion must be destroyed. You stop needing to stand above others, and instead you begin to stand among them, quietly, compassionately, without judgment. You are no longer trying to change the world. You are letting the world reveal itself through you. Awareness no longer isolates you. It connects you to everything. You begin to feel the pulse of life, not as chaos, but as rhythm. You learn to live gently, to speak when truth stirs, and to stay silent when silence carries more wisdom than words. You begin to notice that clarity no longer burns, it illumines. It doesn't demand, it invites. The world begins to trust you again because you no longer weaponize your perception. Your seeing has become soft, not weak, but kind. You've stopped using truth as a sword and begun to carry it as a lantern. People sense this. They feel seen by you, not exposed. They feel understood, not analyzed. This is what happens when awareness integrates. It becomes love. Not sentimental love, but the kind that doesn't need to fix or possess. The kind that can sit in the dark with another and simply hold space for their unfolding. You realize that your greatest gift is not your insight, but your presence. Your ability to be still enough for others to meet themselves in your calm. You stop seeking intensity and start cultivating depth. You stop chasing understanding and start resting in it. And in that stillness, you feel a quiet joy, not the ecstatic kind that burns bright and fades, but the grounded joy of belonging to life again. The paradox dissolves. You are both within the dream and awake to it. You are both the observer and the participant, both human and something more than human. You understand now that separation was never real. It was a temporary blindness that taught you how to see. What once felt like isolation was the cocoon. What you are now is the butterfly, still carrying the memory of darkness, but no longer trapped by it. Integration is not perfection. It's not the end of confusion or the absence of emotion. It's the quiet ability to hold contradiction without collapse. You can feel pain and still trust life. You can witness darkness and still believe in light. You can see the impermanence of all things and still love them fiercely. Because love itself has changed meaning for you. It's no longer about attachment or control, but reverence. You love because it is your nature to do so, not because it guarantees return. This is the essence of awakening, not detachment, but intimacy without fear. To walk through the world with open eyes and an unarmored heart. To know that everything you see, the beauty, the chaos, the noise, the stillness, is all part of the same divine breath, moving through different shapes. You no longer need to protect yourself from life, because you've learned how to let it move through you without taking you under. You have become porous to the sacred. When this understanding settles, life begins to feel weightless again. You move through days with a quiet grace, not seeking, not resisting, simply being. Awareness has rooted itself in your humanity. The split has healed. The exile has ended. You are home, not in the world as you once knew it, but in the silent knowing beneath it. And in that homecoming, you realize that the journey was never about seeing what others don't. It was about learning how to remain human once you do. There is a stillness that arrives after every awakening, a silence, not of absence, but of completion. You feel it like light resting behind your ribs, a warmth that asks for nothing, explains nothing, proves nothing. The long journey of seeing has carried you through the labyrinth of perception, through the loneliness of awareness, through the ache of separation, and the grace of integration. And now you stand at the threshold of something wordless. You are no longer the one who seeks, nor the one who hides. You have become the space where both can rest. The final activation is not a burst of revelation. It is the soft, almost imperceptible turning of the soul toward peace. It's when you stop reaching for understanding and realize that you are understanding. When you stop trying to hold the light and see that the light has been holding you all along. Everything you once thought of as knowledge begins to dissolve into knowing. Everything you once tried to explain becomes unnecessary. The mind bows to something greater, the quiet intelligence of being itself. You begin to see that awakening was never about escaping the human experience. It was about embodying it fully, consciously, lovingly. You no longer reject the noise of the world. You hear its rhythm beneath the chaos. You no longer fight the imperfection of others. You see the hidden wholeness living beneath their confusion. Even your own pain, once a wound you wanted to close, now glows like an old teacher, reminding you that every fracture was how the light entered. The final activation is the merging of opposites. Awareness and humanity, clarity and chaos, self and source. You no longer stand apart from life, observing it. You are life, observing itself. The river you once watched is now flowing through you, and you through it. You begin to understand the strange and beautiful secret of consciousness, that seer and the seen were never two. The observer was always part of the play, and the play was always divine. This realization changes everything, yet demands nothing. You stop chasing enlightenment as an event and begin to live it as a presence. You walk, breathe, eat, speak. But now there is a quiet awareness threading through every act. You feel the pulse of existence in the simplest things, in the breath between words, in the silence between sounds, in the way sunlight touches a wall. You are no longer waiting for meaning, you are meaning in motion. And so you live differently. You listen without trying to fix. You speak without trying to convince. You love without needing to own. You understand that truth doesn't demand to be declared. It reveals itself through the way you exist. You become less of a person performing awareness and more of an awareness that has learned to live as a person. Life continues, but it feels lighter because the burden of trying to hold it has fallen away. This is the true liberation. Not escape, but ease. The art of existing in full consciousness without collapsing beneath it. The ability to stand in a burning world and still see beauty. To know the illusions but also their necessity. To love even the dream, knowing it's made of the same substance as the real. The mind calls it paradox. The soul calls it home. And when you reach this point, there's nothing left to seek. You no longer need to be the awakened one, the empath, the seer. You simply are. Awareness has folded back into itself. The mirror has recognized the light it reflects. You are the watcher and the watched, the voice and the silence between words, the dream and the dreamer waking at the same time. So you move gently now, through a world still learning to see. You smile more, you speak less. You carry a calm that needs no explanation. You begin to notice that your very being has become a sanctuary, a quiet reminder that peace does not come from understanding everything, but from resting in the mystery. This is the final activation, not a transcendence that leaves the world behind, but one that sees the divine shimmering within it. To walk among the unaware without feeling superior, to touch the ordinary and find it holy, to see through the illusion but still bow in gratitude for its beauty. You realize that the purpose of seeing was never to separate you from life, it was to return you to it, awake, humble, and whole. And so the journey ends not in revelation, but in recognition. You are not outside the dream looking in, you are the dream, aware of itself. Consciousness has completed its circle. The eye that once sought now rests in what it sees. And in that stillness, you understand the light you spent your life searching for was never somewhere else. It was always the quiet knowing behind your eyes, waiting, patient, eternal, for you to finally remember that you were never in darkness at all. And so, here you are, on the other side of seeing, not wiser in the way the world defines wisdom, but quieter, deeper, gentler. The noise that once filled you has thinned into silence. The confusion that once fractured you now moves like music you finally understand. Nothing outside has changed. The same faces, the same world, but everything within you has shifted. You see now that awakening was never about leaving the dream. It was about learning to dream consciously. You no longer fight the illusions, you walk through them softly. You no longer resist the shadows, you recognize their necessity in shaping light. You no longer try to fix the world, you love it as it is, knowing it's already becoming what it must. Because you've discovered something sacred. To see clearly is not to stand above life, but to kneel within it, in reverence, not resistance. And from that stillness, something luminous begins to radiate from you. A peace that asks for nothing, a presence that heals without effort, a compassion that does not speak, yet is understood by everything it touches. This is what it means to carry light wisely, not as a torch that burns, but as a quiet glow that guides. Perhaps this is the real purpose of awareness, to become so whole within yourself that your very being whispers to others, you are safe to awaken. No teaching, no convincing, only presence. Because truth does not shout. It hums softly through those who have learned how to live it. So now, as this story closes, let it not be an ending, but a beginning of stillness within you. A reminder that clarity is not distance, that peace is not escape, that to be awake is not to withdraw from the world, but to walk within it, eyes open, heart unarmored, and say quietly, I see, and I remain. You are no longer just the one who notices what others don't. You are the one who has learned to live peacefully with what you see. And in that simple grace, in that calm awareness between breath and being, you become what you were always meant to be. Not the light searching for itself, but the light that knows.